Yeah, what's all this?
Keep back there.
Keep back, me? Do you know who you're talking to?
I give you a last chance to leave me alone.
Give me a last chance. You've committed assault, this what you've done, and you can come along to the station with me. Come along now, come quietly, unless you want me to put the handcuffs on.
Stop where you are. You don't know what you're doing.
I know what I'm doing, all right. Come on.
Get hold of him.
Lock him up! All right, you fools. You've brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I
am. Look, he's all eaten away.
Huh? How do you like that,
You are listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. The following podcast contains adult language, adult situations, and spoilers for the movies discussed occur often. You've been warned. Now, take it away, Dr. Rausch.
They must be destroyed on sight.
Alright, welcome back. It is They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, episode 216, and I'm your host, Lee, peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains, Russell. Joined by my co-host, Daniel. A few murders here and there. Harper, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing 216. What have we done with our lives? Well, I mean, seriously. Anyway, great. I'm doing great. I'm on I was 216, you know. We've done more episodes than we have listeners at this point, but you know, it's fine.
Yeah, and welcoming back after a long fucking time, James, a couple of drinks and a gust of wind. Murphy, how you doing, sir?
Oh man, that exactly describes the evening. Well done. In terms of what you've done with your lives, you've brought joy into the existence of literally dozens of perverts. So don't feel like it's a life that's been wasted, guys. You're doing great.
Yeah. And you think 216 episodes is something, Daniel. I actually looked back tonight to find the last time James was on the podcast. He was on episode 78.
Jesus Christ.
Covering the skull and, strangely enough, coincidence regarding the late Diana Rigg, Theater of Blood. So.
That was so long ago that Daniel still sounded like Walter Matthau, you know?
No, my feeling on that is just like, you know, that was so long ago. Like, remember back when the days were nice and like California was not on fire all the time? Like that was, you know,
yeah, when California didn't look like Mars, like.
You never realise you're living through a golden age of properly tinted reality until it's behind you, do you?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And speaking of seeing things and not seeing things, tonight we are doing The Invisible Man from 1933. Before we get into that, we'll do a little bit of house cleaning here and just talk about what we've watched as of late. I know Daniel has nothing to mention this time out, but James
I don't
does.
Watch movies. I don't like movies. I don't know why you invite me onto this. I don't watch it. It's fine.
An increasingly hostile Daniel there as you move into your third century. Yeah, just a couple of very quick ones, and nothing that's going to be revelations to anyone listening. I watched the movie Knives Out with James Bond as Colonel Sanders. It was pretty good. It was a good time. Each of the character actors had their moments to shine on there, and it's just nice to see an original piece of media, not based on a comic book, not coming out of the mind of some demented noir author, having fun with the form, and getting towards the end of what looks like a happy ending. So yeah, good stuff there. And it was a kind of a double bill, and they ended up kind of complementing each other politically and what they had to say, but in slightly different approaches. The other one was The Hunt, where a liberal group of people go hunting after humanly, dangerous game style, a group of what they think are Trump supporters. And that's an excellent film as well. Heartily recommend. I won't give any plot details away apart from the premise, but I would say listeners should check both of those movies out.
Yeah, I've been wanting to check out The Hunt. I've seen Knives Out. I need to rewatch it a couple times before I actually do any sort of review on it or whatever. But and I enjoyed it quite a bit, by the way. But I was it's just kind of one of those movies where you watch and it's like, wow, I'm watching something really, really good. This is really, really good.
It's funny. It's funny. Like for me, like my experience of talking about Knives Out online with people from the British Isles is, this is just Agatha Christie. And, as an American, we don't get Agatha Christie in our, pop culture. It just isn't a thing, it's, there may be some masterpiece theater out there. It's oh, yeah, there are people with fancy accents solving crimes on trains, and that's all that, Agatha Christie is, And so I think that it's interesting that James appreciated Knives Out more than any person from that part of the world that I've spoken to has. Even just being vaguely positive. Yeah, no, this was a good time. I enjoyed this. Because, everyone else I've talked to is this is just a pale Agatha Christie retread. So I find that interesting,
I mean, I like to think that those who dislike Knives Out for those reasons are all fusty colonels of an entire collection of Hercule Poirot novels, and I'm going to choose to believe that this is an act of class war on my part to have enjoyed the movie as much as I have.
I'm on board with that. No, I'm just gonna say, it has possibly the greatest line in cinema history, which is, I haven't read Gravity's Rainbow. No one has.
All right. I just got one thing I'll mention, and this was one I was actually kind of hesitant to watch at first, but I just thought, oh fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. It just popped up on Netflix. It's from 2020. #Alive. And it was because of the hashtag in the title. I guess that's something maybe we need to accept in the coming years, that's just going to be part of titles here and there, maybe. But it's a...
So is it hashtag spelled out, or is it hashtag the symbol?
Hashtag the symbol, yeah.
So it could very easily be called Octothorpe Alive, and I think that's a thing that we should encourage.
Number Alive, perhaps? Tic-Tac-Toe Alive?
Well, the thing is, it's a Korean zombie film, a South Korean zombie film, and if you've liked Train to Busan, for instance, this is very much in that vein. It's got the sort of fast zombie thing, but it's set in an apartment block in Korea. So it's this young kid who's very tech savvy. He just finds himself stuck in his apartment. His parents and his the rest of his family have gone out on a trip, and they've we've left very little food in the house. Go out and get some groceries, but he's a typical young slacker kid who's into playing online games and doing social media shit all the time. So he hesitates on getting groceries, and then all of a sudden, zombie outbreak. And he watches it from, his apartment, all the streets below, everything just goes to shit. And it's all of a sudden he's stuck in the apartment, and he's got to find food and water very soon. And so he sort of uses his tech-savvy instincts to try to help him. He's got a little drone at one point that he utilizes for several different things. Gets in contact with a survivor on the apartment block across the street. This young woman who's just as tough as nails, chick who survived just by pure guile more than anything else. And they have to hatch a plan together to try to escape and then get rescued by somebody. That's kind of their hope. But it's really well done. I thought it was really well acted, and the real benefit here, especially for people who maybe find a lot of sort of East Asian horror films these days far too long, this is a half hour shorter than Train to Busan. So it's in and out much quicker. held my attention for the entire viewing. I enjoyed it. You know, it's nothing super revolutionary or anything. It's kind of lightweight and fun in some ways, but it's also really good with the horror stuff. Some of the set pieces of the zombies and stuff, because he has to, you know, creep out of his door into these fucking narrow hallways that are just swarming with zombies, because, you know, almost everybody else in his apartment building got infected right away, right? So he's like literally the only one in there, and he's got to like sort of navigate his way through his apartment building to get food and shit like that. So it's really well done.
No, it sounds good. It's been a little while since I've watched a East Asian horror film. The last one that I really zoomed into was, I think it was last year's One Cut of the Dead, and I enjoyed that, but I would rather if it had dropped probably 75% of the gimmick that it chose to. If it had just gone with what the first half hour of that movie was, I would come out of it a lot more satisfied. But no, #live, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I've been enjoying a lot of this sort of East Asian horror lately. A lot of Indonesian horror has been pretty big right ever since like the Korean horror boom. Like the Indonesian stuff has gotten a lot of attention too. So some really good stuff coming out of that part of the world right now. But yeah. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to play a little bit of promos and some music, and we're going to come back and talk about The Invisible Man.
You ungodly warlock.
You go through your week with the same old routine.
What you really want is some blood and thunder in your life.
Well, friend, you found it.
The Cromcast is an adventurous journey through the history of two-fisted pulp stories.
With your hosts John,
Josh,
And Luke.
we have action,
horror,
An adventure. All through the lens of pulp luminary Robert E. Howard.
Don't just stay in your ordinary life.
find your pulp life at thecromcast.blogspot.com.
The Cromcast.
The Cromcast.
The Cromcast!
A podcast for the barbarian at heart.
You ungodly warlock.
Okay, The Invisible Man, 1933, directed by James Whale. You might have heard of him. We've mentioned him a couple times on this podcast as of late.
Once or twice.
Yeah. And this is based on the story written by H.G. Wells, just some dude. He wrote a couple books, whatever.
Invented science fiction, arguably. That guy.
Yeah,
Mild eugenicist. Other thing we should know about.
It was the 1920s. Everyone was allowed to be eugenicists if they wanted to be. It hadn't been proved wrong yet.
Yeah,
it had.
They could be mildly racist. They could name their pets after racial slurs. They could do all kinds of stuff like that. It's fine.
H.G. Wells, not as bad as H.P. Lovecraft. That's
considerably worse than H.P. Source.
Also written by R.C. Sheriff. Didn't see anything too interesting that he was connected to. Preston Sturges added some dialogue and stuff here. Famous director and writer. Known for his, sort of witty, comedic kind of stuff that he would direct and write. A lot of movies about young women with snappy dialogue and stuff. I was sort of looking at in his filmography there. Also written by Philip Weil, who's known for doing Island of Lost Souls from 1932. And he was a novelist and sort of screenwriter. His novel When Worlds Collide was adapted into the movie in the 50s. Fairly well-known science fiction film. We'll move on to the cast here. We have Claude Rains as Dr. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man, actor known for other stuff like The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938, Juarez from 1939, which I actually put on our list because it looked pretty interesting. It's about like Napoleon, I can't remember, but going to like Mexico during, I think, around the Mexican Revolution or something like that, and looked interesting. Also starred in The Wolf Man from 1941, which is one we're going to be covering in maybe 3 years when we get to 41.
When we finally cover the next 8 years. Yeah. I hear there was a person named James Murphy who was encouraging us to take as much time as possible to get through these. So.
That's right. I was just about to say, if you do happen to slow down to a year per year, so 2020 is the year of 1933, I'm quite happy to wait the 12 years to get to The Wolfman.
And also famously known for being in Casablanca from 1942, among a lot of other stuff. Claude Rains, not just some dude, kind of did some stuff. You have Gloria Stewart, who we've already covered in The Old Dark House from 1932, and of course she lived to age 100 and was in Titanic in 1997. So she did some stuff too.
it would only be better if she had been in An Affair to Remember in 1957 or whatever year that movie came out, to complete the full picture there,
Yeah.
It is nice though to be getting to this stage of Hollywood where you guys have mentioned it yourselves. When you look on the Wikipedia, I wonder if this guy did anything else. Immediately death of cancer. Like the second they stopped filming, when the director said cut, they had an awful heart attack and arteriosclerosis.
Yep.
Died of alcoholism 6 months after filming was done.
Exactly.
We got William Harrington as Dr. Arthur Kemp. He'd go on to be in stuff like G-Men from 1935 and Desert Fury from 1947. And then we got a bunch of other people here. Henry Travers as Dr. Cranley. Una O'Connor, who would show up later in Bride of Frankenstein. I guess she basically played this character in most of the movies she was in as, the loud Irish woman, basically. Forrester Harvey is Herbert Hall.
I.e. James's favorite. That's
That's right. Anything that's Irish is the best. Boyzone is the best Irish band. Guinness is the best possible stout. If it's Irish, it's the best example of the form. So Una O'Connor, best shrill woman who has a strained relationship with a long-suffering husband.
I really love the bagpipes. Great Irish invention.
Yeah.
And that great type of Scott whiskey called Irish. From the Highlands. The peaty stuff.
Yeah, that really stuff that tastes like fucking smoked mackerel. Yeah, that's good stuff. Holmes Herbert as the chief of police. Shut the fuck up.
I just love fucking with James Murphy. It's this. All right. Move on.
E. Clive as Constable Jaffers, Dudley Diggs as Chief Detective, Harry Stubbs as Inspector Bird, Donald Stewart as Inspector Lane, and Merle Trottenham as Millie. And we have a synopsis here from Jay Sperling on IMDb. Mysterious man whose head is completely covered in bandages wants a room. The proprietors of the pub aren't used to making their house an inn during the winter months, but the man insists. They soon come to regret their decision. The man quickly runs out of money, and he has a violent temper besides. Worse still, he seems to be some kind of chemist and has filled his room with messy chemicals, test tubes, beakers, and the like. When they try to throw him out, they make a ghastly discovery. Meanwhile, Flora Cranley appeals to her father to do something about the mysterious disappearance of Dr. Griffin, his assistant, and her sweetheart. Her father's other assistant, the cowardly Dr. Kemp, is no help. He wants her for himself. Little does Flora guess that the wild tales from newspapers and radio broadcasts of an invisible homicidal maniac are stories of Dr. Griffin himself, who has discovered the secret of invisibility and gone mad in the process. And yeah, that pretty much covers it. Well done.
It's equally got about the same amount of percentage of concern, that synopsis, with the state of an Edwardian drawing room as the film itself, which is about 20%, which is great. It's good they captured that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's get into it. So I'm assuming this is not the first time you've seen this, James, but get into it and sort of give us your general thoughts on it.
Well, it's a James Well film, isn't it? So what you're going to be guaranteed is a level of quality and imagination and consideration that you're not going to find in a lot of other filmmakers at this time. And one of the absolute pleasures of the film is seeing the pleasure they're taking in solving issues that people haven't realised are issues yet. And so, whilst on the one hand I am enjoying the movie on its surface level as a knockabout comedy, as occasionally a thriller, what I'm really enjoying as well is just the sheer bravura of filmmaking that you're getting out of it. So yeah, its reputation as a classic is well deserved, I'd say.
Right on. Daniel.
This is not a first time watch for me. I mean, I saw it a number of years ago, but it has been a long time, and I didn't. It's kind of one of those, oh yeah, I kind of watched it vaguely at some point. I don't know, we should probably talk about a little bit about the novel, which I read when I was, in, middle school, when I was, 14 or so.
This follows the novel fairly closely.
Yeah, although, I don't remember the novel that well. The bits that I remember of the novel are mostly in this movie.
Although,
if that makes sense,
Yeah, Wells was a humorless chap. None of the humor that you see in this film is present at all in the novel.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. I think it's it's obviously kind of a masterpiece of its era. I mean, James Whale, everything that James said is completely accurate. What I found interesting is kind of thinking about the sort of the context of the novel, which was written in 1897 and the film in 1933, in terms of sort of the state of where the science was, in terms of because in the novel it's sort of oh, I invented a bunch of elixirs that individually converted my flesh to various shades of transparent, and then quote unquote magic happens, and now I'm invisible. And he's kind of portrayed as being I was kind of crazy to begin with. And then by 1933, it's more of sort of I've got this one chemical that will do this, and I'm looking for the antidote, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a real big history of organic chemistry that happened between 1897 and 1933.
Wells was even criticized at the time that. As much as he and if you actually read the story, he does go fairly well into detail about what's happening, right? Enough where the layman can sort of go, okay, I can buy that. But someone pointed out to him the process he uses. If you were actually able to turn someone's entire body invisible in the way that it's sort of described, they would go completely blind because they'd have no way to protect their eyes from light, basically.
You can't refract light in your eyes, It's because of that, and like this is kind of one of those like kind of magic things that we get from any Invisible Man story, right? Is like it just kind of has to be that way. But I find it interesting. I kind of got from this, like kind of watching it this afternoon. I kind of got this like sense of like there is this kind of real fear of or just kind of the way that the science is portrayed is kind of interesting, because when you're talking about like kind of the 1890s, this whole like idea of the mad scientist with like beakers and tubes and these kind of like big glass vials and lots of bubbling things kind of wandering around. Like this lasts for a long time in pop culture because like organic chemistry was this like brand new thing. The electron was discovered in 1933. And so like early chemists in the 19th century developed this whole like praxis around like how to actually make these like kind of complicated organic products without really having a theoretical understanding of how to do it. And so there was this kind of magic involved even for the people doing the work at the time. And the theory actually like trailed behind the praxis by some decades just because we had no technology that allowed us to understand that kind of, and like the mathematics hadn't even been invented at that point. And so I don't know, like I know this is like really obscure and not necessarily what people come here for, but I did find that like interesting that like by 1933 they're not even really talking about like what the thing is. It's really just it's presenting him as, oh yeah, I've got this elixir, I've got this I've got like my little powders and I've got my little like my glass vials and everything, and I'm developing my thing, and this is supposed to be like I'm a crazy person, despite the fact that we're now at the beginning of the nuclear age. Like 1933 is also the year in which the atom was first split, so like it's crazy. We're in that realm between chemistry moving on into nuclear science, and by the 50s it becomes like a few years later this would have been made as I did some weird experiment with X-rays or whatever.
Yeah,
I did some weird experiment, and so it is kind of weird that at this point it is just kind of this like weird magic that allows him to be invisible. I don't know. I like the film. That's just kind of what came to mind upon watching it. So
it's interesting because you do catch medical society on the cusp between the alchemical and the actually scientific as we understand it today, moving more towards that. Well, obviously the scientific method means it's constantly theoretical, but you're going from like John Dee to Robert Oppenheimer, and this is the link in between those, and that's really fun. That's a fun part of it because he is essentially a wizard in this, and it could be just as easily set 400 years previously,
Yeah.
Or it could have been some magic spell or something. I mean, we did the zombie movie we did a few weeks ago.
White Zombie.
Yeah, White Zombie.
Yeah, it could very easily have been like some spell that he has or some like magic thing I got from the natives of some island somewhere or something.
They do mention what it is, right? Like there's some sort of chemical compound they extracted from this like rare flower. And then, of course, the flower was just like the pure chemical or whatever they used turned like a dog pale white or something like that, right? And then it turned it mad as well. So it's like the side effect is it turns you crazy. And so our scientist here, Griffin, he describes at some point in the film where he did like 1,000 experiments with this chemical to try to make it work properly. And then finally he got to the point where it doesn't turn you white anymore. It turns you invisible as shit. And so he injected it into himself, and now he's trying to reverse the process, which he just fails to do utterly in the film. But
maybe you should have solved that problem before you injected yourself, you fucking asshole.
But you totally buy that of Claude Rains' character, even if we're supposed to accept that he's become a more evil and destructive madman. You absolutely get the sense that this is a guy who will go, there's no time at all, and just inject it straight into his veins rather than do anything. But the science and the approach of the movie is in keeping with the tradition of Wells, who is a science fiction creator, the creator of the genre, arguably, as you say, Daniel, is much more interested in the fiction than the science. Like his Journey to the Moon book is pretty much people standing on a really powerful trampoline and getting to the moon from there.
Yeah.
And which is, that's 60 years before the Apollo missions. That's still really impressive that, he anticipated as much as he actually did. But again, it does go back to how faithful an adaptation of the novel and the spirit of the novel, apart from the humour, that this is.
Yeah,
well, and Jules Verne was the sort of like I'm designing like the engineering version of this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna launch my people going to the moon from a big cannon, and then like he complained that Wells is like, oh, you just got some anti-gravity metal, like that would ever work? No, big cannon. That's the way this is gonna happen.
I find it amusing. Like if you look at something like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and like it incorporates all of those things. So like you'll have the Nautilus, so that works. But you also have fucking Moriarty trying to get a hold of this anti-gravity material and use that to control the world and make airships and stuff like that. So
yeah, sorry to take us along that path for that long, but it was definitely like I do enjoy the movie, and I do enjoy sort of the plot of the movie, but it did like that was the thing that struck me immediately was that kind of like that friction between sort of like the 1890s when the story was written versus the 1930s, and sort of the way that like it's been updated but not really, and the way that then this vision of what a mad scientist looks like plays into kind of future films of this era. It just kind of gets bigger, and you do like more and more. You get more and more bubbling vials essentially as you get a bigger budget. Like
his lab looks like the father / doctor character who is the father of the love interest who his lab. I love how his lab looks in this film. Like it's like when I first saw this years ago, I thought, oh shit! Like I was looking at the sets in the inn that Griffin goes to, and it's like, wow, this kind of looks sort of cheap. Is this whole movie going to be like set dressed like this? And then you get to this guy's fucking house in this fucking lab, and it looks great. But at the same time, it's like a very utilitarian kind of lab. Like it's very spacious, and almost everything's on this one table, and he's got these big open windows behind the lab, and you look outside to the dead trees because it's like wintertime when this takes place, and just looks very, very good. But yeah, I like this a lot. I like Wales injecting humor into this. Like we were talking about Old Dark House. You can sort of see his sensibilities creep into everything he does, and it really works here, especially with Rains as Griffin, because in the actual original story, he's just a reprehensible piece of shit that you could not possibly be interested in, like kind of following in any sort of way where it's like you're sympathetic to him to any degree. Really, like he's just an asshole who murders people, and he's got the agency and license to do it now because he's invisible. But here, Rains, who has this theatrical background, and he's got to be basically off camera for the 99% of his screen time in this film. And so his theatrical background really comes into play here, where he has to act bigger. He has to be bigger in the way he talks, the way he moves, and it just works really well. Like in any other film, it would feel like he's just chewing the scenery, and it might stand out a little too much. But here it's perfect, and I just like that. I just like that Griffin is just this self-indulgent, lazy asshole a lot of the time too. Like he's just. He likes to put on like fucking smoking jacket and just lounge around. He likes to sleep a lot, and he goes to bed wearing PJs. He complains about the cold as he's going crazy. And I mean,
again, he is spending a lot of time naked. Like just to be clear, like that's something that is is explicit in the film. That like I don't actually. He is naked. No one ever mentions like he got a big floppy donkey dick just hanging out there in the snow there, don't you, buddy?
I reckon there's a game to be played. Which parts of the film is he engorged and which flaccid as he goes around naked? Because he's got to enjoy some of it. So when he's in the bar knocking people's hats off and all that sort of stuff, I reckon he's as hard as a diamond personally.
he knocked those glasses off the bar.
Yeah, I just imagine like after he dies, You know, because like all of his like flesh becomes like visible again as he dies for like magic reasons. Like and then suddenly like all the semen stains like show up on
If you,
I'd better
yeah,
invent something called the black light to see exactly what's done wrong here.
yeah, if you put a black light in that fucking inn that he was staying in at the time, it would just be all one color. It would just be, you wouldn't see anything else. I will say also, like, if there's any detriment to this film, it's also the humor when it gets to like the comedic foil cops, because you get like probably the most egregious version of "What's all this then?" from a cop that you're ever going to see on film. Like it is like the quintessential fucking Cockney kind of cop who's just like, "You just done a crime, you did," and it's like, yeah, thanks, dude. And also the innkeeper's wife, the female innkeeper, Jenny Hall, played by Una O'Connor. I think sometimes she goes a little too over the top with her hysterics, like to the point where it's grating. Like I'm like, you could tone it down a little bit. I get it. You're the loud complaining Irish wife who is frazzled by everything to the extent that no wonder your fucking husband drinks all the time. Like he gets hit on the head, first thing he's doing is downing like a ton of like sherry or whiskey or the fuck he's drinking. Like you get that scene afterwards after he's assaulted by Griffin and he's got the bandage on his head and he's clearly drunk already. Like he's into like his fourth cup of booze at that point.
The film is kind of like pitched to that like high camp level though, which I feel like it's a thing that it'd be very easy to kind of like paint James Whale as a gay man who was a director, who was a big name at the time, and he's sort of recognized as being like, oh yeah, Bride of Frankenstein is like a full like camp movie. It's easy to kind of oversimplify that as like, oh, that's his aesthetic because he's gay or whatever. But I think that this is meant to be both. Like, it is a thriller, it is horror, but it is comedy, and it is like it is kind of like shockingly modern in a way. Like this is something that you can kind of, I don't know. I feel like that you could point this to people. Like it's not quite as modern as some of the other stuff that we've looked at. And but I think you can kind of take kind of the horror comedy thing. Like horror comedy existed from the beginning of horror in movies, basically. And I think this is kind of a key to that. It's like, yeah, it's horrific. It's meant to be kind of a story that kind of hits you on that level, but it does use the heightened emotions to also give you some funny bits. And I feel like some of that performance is meant to be kind of over the top. Intentionally.
Well, yeah, no, I totally agree that like it's supposed to be over the top. I just feel like the innkeeper's wife, sometimes she gets a little too high, right? Like you shouldn't be matching Claude Rains or even overtaking Claude Rains in your sort of like in the way you're acting, because Claude Rains is just all over the place. Like he's chewing up the scenery. He is big. He's got that. This is another thing that's interesting about this film. He's got that that really roll your R's kind of like British accent, like very sort of upper crust kind of aristocratic kind of idea, and like you see the sort of stereotypical class differences here. So like you got the innkeeper, the innkeepers and their clients are all sort of the sort of typical stereotypical lower class, and they're instantly suspicious of Griffin. And Griffin is this educated guy who's just instantly intolerant of them and dismissive of them and treats them like serfs. And you get a lot of the comedy from that too, right? Like it's very much like all these people like circling around him, trying to figure out what he's about. Would you like some towels? Would you like this? Would you like that? I'll bring up a drink for you and all that. And always peeking into his room. It's like, will you get out of my room? Will you leave me alone? Will you get the fuck out of my room? I'll wire the money to you tomorrow. And, like all this other shit, right? And that stuff works for the most part. But again, like every once in a while, they threaten to overtake Claude Rains, which I think is kind of a mistake.
You make me think there should be a shot-for-shot remake with Vinnie Jones as Claude Rains.
Set it in France. Vinnie Jones's Invisible Man in France. Just him really pissed off at the frauds what's around him. But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of where this film's delight comes from is the Invisible Man fucking with society's norms. I would say that James Wells is having a great time through the prism of the Invisible Man, just doing exactly what he pleases. You know, you can sense that he's just been pissed off by the small-minded, small townspeople that he's encountered in his life, and he's wanted to go out there and knock their hats off and throw bicycles at them. And for a lot of the movie, even as he's doing terrible things, just like a little casual murder in between his delighted giggling hijinks, the movie's very much on his side, you know?
Yeah, even when he's, and I mean, in 2020, it's like you strangle a cop to the floor and then bash his face into a stool.
Yeah.
You can, it's fine, kind of fine. All right, well then.
Give him the choice.
I'm not advocating the murder of cops, by the way, or at least not outside of Minecraft. But you know. But no. The film just sort of does it brings the viewer in and makes them sort of complicit with his crimes to a degree where it's like, this would be really cool, wouldn't it? Right? Like he murders a lot of people in this film off screen, so that kind of lessens the degree of his horribleness because you don't see it happen. So as the viewer can be kind of like, all right, it's all right. He killed one or two cops on screen, but he fucked up that bar really well. Like he pulled some people's pants down. He knocked a couple cops into a pile. He knocked some glasses off a fucking countertop. And I mean, that innkeeper's wife, she really had that coming. Like, come on.
I think this is a place to sort of talk about the special effects a bit because, a lot of it is kind of based on this almost like kind of vaudevillian, we're gonna, demolish the bar by, we've got like strings and we're just gonna shoot, this string going along and like destroying all the glassware. We're gonna pull people's pants down. We're gonna, kind of make people, spin around or kind of do their thing. And like, I feel like that's kind of where a lot of the comedy or sort of this, this kind of vision of this kind of comes from is like, once you realize like this is the level of the effects you can do and this is the level of, then it is kind of like once you kind of like test it and once you look at it, you're kind of like, well, if this is what our horror scenes look like is, a guy kind of clutching at his throat and going like, or whatever, you kind of have to like pitch this to a sort of comedy. And that's not as an insult to the special effects. I mean, this may be the first like kind of like really big effects movie like ever made because like it's very clear that they did have like shots that were designed for, we're going to look at the Invisible Man like standing around with his dick hanging out, which you can't see, and his like shirt sleeves, which you can see, sort of thing. Like there is a lot of that kind of going on in the movie, and clearly they did a bunch of screen tests. They kind of developed the technology that allowed them to do this with like kind of an early version of a blue screen, which is apparently like a black velvet suit he was wearing alongside, and then they did like a composite shot. I mean, this is cutting edge stuff, and like to really like focus on the effects, like an audience in 1932 isn't looking at this in the way that you and I are looking at it and going like, well, with CG you could like make this seamless. An audience in 1932 is going to look at, or 1933 is looking at this and going like, what the fuck am I even looking at? This is a completely off the wall thing for an audience at that time. And so like just as a technical innovation, and the fact that like looking at it from the technology, doing the technology in the way that they did it, and then kind of realizing like, well, this looks like this kind of big kind of comedy thing, and so we kind of have to pitch the story a little bit more towards campy comedy. I think that's kind of the genius of it. That's why it works as well as it does, and it isn't just sort of seen as a technical marvel that ultimately didn't work otherwise. I mean, this is remembered as a great film.
This isn't Deluge, where it's like, right. the effects are really all the movie's about, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
It's fun because the effects, the tone, you get the sense that Well is trying desperately not to repeat Frankenstein. He doesn't want to make Frankenstein again. And everyone else involved was like, hey, let's do Frankenstein. That made a bundle of money. And so you're at the outset of the Universal monster films with someone who's enjoyed the Gothic trappings previously, but doesn't want to employ them here. And for me, that sort of lack of aesthetics, it's almost a shame. I would love to have had some more broken down towers. I would like to have had more like the Clarence Angel from It's a Wonderful Life. I'd like to have seen his laboratory be more like Frankenstein's. It would have been really cool. But that's not what the filmmaker was interested in making. He wanted to get sillier. He wanted to bring out the humour in this. And he probably wanted to show the special effects to, hey, look what I can do. You know, it's that Orson Welles thing where it's the biggest train set a boy can play with. You can sense that pleasure in those scenes.
Although at the same time, and yeah, I'm glad you brought up Frankenstein, he kind of still does do Frankenstein in this film, right? Because you still get the idea of, like, you know, the townspeople getting up in arms. At times they're running away from the Invisible Man. At other times they're mobbing up to go and find him. There's, you know, the burning of the barn at the end, which sort of doubles for, you know, the burning out of Frankenstein's monster, you know, in that movie to you know, to get him. So there's still, even though, like, and I agree, I think he definitely is trying to, like, move away from that. He's still kind of caught in those trappings a little bit. He still kind of does it to a certain degree.
There's less of a sense that the townspeople are scared of this guy, although they are kind of scared of this guy, as much as, like, the cops are, like, developing methods of kind of coming after him. One of the things I really appreciated is, like, the cops are kind of like, they're in a room and they're like, maybe the Invisible Man is here, and so, like, they put, you know, the mesh, and they, like, run across the room and make sure there's no invisible person in there. And I mean, you know, there is a kind of lack of sort of awareness of, you know, some of the tropes of the Invisible Man, you know, in terms of, you know, what that would be like. You know, later on you kind of see, like, the Invisible Man as, like, the hunted figure as opposed to the hunter. And here it's more kind of like this kind of technological marvel. And, you know, far be it from me to praise, like, you know, thinking highly of cops in movies. But, you know, there is a sense in which the movie is kind of thinking ahead, and in terms of, like, you know, what would law enforcement do to protect themselves from this guy.
I was impressed by what the police were doing. It was well thought out all the way through. And in some places as well, you can see the police acting as surrogates. You know, it's as if he's anticipating people talking back to the screen. Well, he was a good idea, mister. Oh, I never thought of that. You know, it was that kind of back and forth between one of the policemen and the chief police. Like, no, that wouldn't work because of this, and this. And
which feels, again, very, like, modern filmmaking. You know, like, James Whale is 90 years ahead. In some ways,
that tired old cop is, like, they're explaining, like, well, we need to, you know, crack down on these, you know, robberies and stuff like that. We got to check all these out. Like, those robberies could have been committed by just normal people committing robberies like they do all the time, you know? You can't really say that's the Invisible Man, you know, one way or the other. And
it'd be interesting to see, like, a police procedural built around, like, an Invisible Man, right? You know, where, you know, you just suddenly start seeing, like, random petty crimes and then, like, one murder, and then you kind of work out that, like, it had to be an Invisible Man because you see, like, video footage. And so, like, how do you, like, track down an Invisible Man from like a police procedure perspective? You know what I fucking want? I want Sherlock Holmes versus the Invisible Man. That's what I want.
That would work.
I'm kind of amazed that never happened. Like, that totally should have happened in the 40s.
Yeah.
There's probably some episode, or some issue rather, of Leading a Story Gentleman where it happens and Adam Moore has something terrible happen to them both.
Yeah.
But I love Daniel's idea of basically CSI Carpathian, where the police go up against a new Universal monster every week, and it's just that Monster of the Week format.
David Caruso, the leader of a team.
Actually, I kind of want to see, like, Columbo or Monk.
An Invisible Man. Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Just one more thing.
One more thing. Where were you on this night? And why couldn't anyone see you that night? What's going on? You know, my wife, she really does this shit that nags me.
I just want to see the private detective do it. I don't want any more cop movies. Any more cop shows doesn't need to happen. But
You want to keep the humor in. You get Jesus Christ!
Could have Philip Marlowe versus Invisible Man. That'd be good.
Yeah, I just totally lost the 70s film where it's the cop transported 30 years basically. We did it on the podcast. Oh my god, I can't believe it. It's one of the best movies ever made. I can't believe I just fucking blanked on it.
Are you thinking of The Long Goodbye?
Long Goodbye, I think so. Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah, sexy Elliot Gould. That'd be
yeah,
really
Elliot
good.
Gould. Yes, fucking, that would work. Because that's funny throughout the entire thing. And it's like you can have the humor of him trying to catch this. And I mean, set the 70s, have the fucking Invisible Man. You know what he's doing? He's peeping on chicks in fucking shower stalls and shit like that, right? Like that's what
we
he's
could
doing.
even bring in like 80s sex comedy tropes on that.
Yeah.
Just see the coke disappear up his nose and then go into his system.
I kind of want Ryan Johnson to direct this with Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the detective and Daniel Craig as the Invisible Man.
That
Sounds
works.
good.
That really works.
Hollywood, call us, please.
Yeah, come on. You guys are desperate right now for great ideas. Give us a shot. We'll take your money. You can put someone to write your shit. Like you give it some fucking hack who's gonna put some titties in there, whatever. It's like we'll sell the idea to you and sit back and collect our millions. It's fine.
They won't put titties in it. They'll just turn it into a franchise and completely ruin everything about it, and then put our names on it, and then we get all the Twitter hate. That's the thing.
We spent all the money we made trying to sue them to take our names off it.
Right? Yeah.
The first film ever where literally everyone is credited as Alan Smithy.
Yeah. The only other real note I had, love the fucking film. It's an undisputed classic. I don't think there's anyone who actively hates this film. If they do, I don't even know why they watch films. But
we will find them in our YouTube comments, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah. Well, they'll just be looking for the movie. It's like it's on YouTube. You can actually find the movie on YouTube if you want to find it. The only other thing that struck me here is how iconic his look is with the sunglasses and the goggles, and then I mean, Darkman is an obvious comparison, right? But I was also thinking about Mad Love with Peter Lorre.
Yeah.
That kind of connects quite big. It's a really iconic horror image that has just been copied since just timeless times over and over again, right? And it still works really well. He just looks. I don't even know how to describe how he looks. It's elusive and frightening and weird.
Imagine if you were invisible and you had to mask yourself. How do you do that? And I think today you say, okay, hoodie, mask, glasses, and then maybe some cream on your forehead or whatever, but wrapping your face up. And again, this is very 1933. It's post World War One. It's entirely possible. I'm some guy who has a ton of burns from World War One. It's entirely not not implausible that you run into somebody who has full facial burns who needs to kind of come in and get a room or whatever. And so while it's unusual, it's justifiable in that sense.
It's still a period where people they actively could wear gloves all day in their life, even if they're not working with heavy machinery or anything like that. I just wear gloves. That's what I do.
Yeah, and
it's not that weird. I do like that he makes a decision though to actually wear a wig under his wrappings and have some of it sort of stick out. So there's actually some thought into making the disguise plausible.
Right. Yeah.
Which is good. I like that a lot. You guys have any sort of final thoughts you want to throw in here? Or?
You guys are probably better placed to answer this than I am because of your journey through cinema so far. But you've said that there's been other films that have felt more modern. For me, in the editing and the camera moves and that sort of stuff, it felt like something from 20 years later, which is incredible. And again, the special effects were, I think, the big budget of the 1930s.